My boss expected me to work overtime without pay, so I quit and took the whole department with me. It wasn't unusual for my boss to push for extra hours when a deadline loomed. That's part of the job, right? But there's a difference between occasional overtime and being expected to practically live at the office, especially when there's no additional pay to show for it. For months, the team and I had been shouldering the weight of projects, sacrificing evenings and weekends, hoping that at some point management would recognize our hard work. Maybe a raise, a bonus, or at least some gratitude. But instead, all we got were more demands. It started with subtle hints. We'd be in a meeting discussing upcoming projects, and my boss, Greg, would drop comments like, "This is a big one. Might need some extra hours from you guys." At first, no one protested. We were professionals, and we took pride in our work, but over time, those extra hours became the new normal. Late-night emails, weekend meetings, and impromptu calls on days off became expected. It was a never-ending cycle of work without any consideration for our lives outside the office. I can remember the moment when everything came to a head. It was a Friday evening, and the team was wrapping up after yet another exhausting week. Most of us were looking forward to a quiet weekend, maybe a break from the endless grind. But as we were packing up, Greg called us all into a meeting. His usual smirk was plastered on his face, and I already knew this wasn't going to be good. "All right, team," Greg began. "I know you've been working hard, and I really appreciate that. But we've got another big project coming in, and the deadline is tight. So I'll need everyone to put in extra time this weekend. We've got to stay ahead." I stared at him, dumbfounded. This wasn't a request, it was an order. There was no mention of overtime pay, no offer of time off in lieu. It was simply expected. When no one immediately responded, Greg seemed to take our silence as agreement. "I'm counting on all of you," he said with that smug grin. "The client is important, and we can't afford to mess this up." I felt my jaw clench. It wasn't just that I was tired, though I was completely drained. It was the blatant disrespect. No recognition of the sacrifices we'd already made, no regard for the fact that we all had lives outside of work. And worst of all, no offer to compensate us for the extra hours we were being forced to put in. After the meeting, I decided to talk to some of my co-workers. Maybe it was just me who was feeling like this was getting out of hand. But as soon as I approached Lisa, one of the senior designers, her face told me everything I needed to know. "I can't believe he's asking us to work this weekend again," she muttered, shaking her head. "This is the third weekend in a row, and my husband's starting to get fed up with it. I barely see him anymore." Paul, another member of the team, was equally frustrated. "At first, I didn't mind putting in the extra time," he said, "but this is getting ridiculous. We're not even being compensated. If Greg thinks we're all just going to work ourselves to death for nothing, he's got another thing coming." That was when the idea started to form in my mind. It wasn't just me. The entire team was exhausted, underappreciated, and fed up. If Greg wouldn't listen to us as individuals, maybe we could make him listen as a group. I called a meeting with the team after work that night, off the clock and off company property. We gathered at a nearby cafe, and over coffee and some shared frustration, I laid out my thoughts. "We've all been working ourselves into the ground," I said. "And Greg just keeps piling on more. There's no overtime, no recognition, and no respect for our time. We've all seen what happens when people push themselves too hard. Burnout isn't just some abstract concept. It's real, and we're all headed straight for it. I'm thinking about quitting." A murmur rippled through the group, but no one seemed surprised. In fact, a few of them nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking about quitting too," Lisa admitted. "I just didn't want to leave the team in a lurch." Paul chimed in. "Honestly, I'm ready to walk out. But what if we didn't just quit one by one? What if we all left? At the same time?" The idea hung in the air for a moment, all of us, quitting together, taking the whole department with us. It sounded almost crazy. But the more we talked about it, the more sense it made. Greg had treated us like we were expendable for months, piling on more work and expecting us to do it for free. If we all left, it would send a message he couldn't ignore. We spent the next hour hashing out the details. We agreed that we wouldn't just leave without warning. That wouldn't be fair to the clients we'd worked so hard to build relationships with. But we also decided that enough was enough. We would finish the current projects on our plates, then hand in our resignations together. Over the next few weeks, we kept our plan quiet while wrapping up our work. It wasn't easy. Greg continued to push us, throwing last-minute requests our way and expecting us to drop everything to meet his demands. But knowing that we had an exit strategy kept us going. Finally, the day arrived. We had completed our projects and the department was running as smoothly as ever, despite the mounting tension between Greg and the team. That morning, I sent an email to Greg, requesting a meeting with him and the entire department. He agreed, probably assuming we were gathering to discuss the next big project. When we all walked into the conference room, Greg was sitting at the head of the table, looking pleased with himself. "Good to see everyone here," he said. "I've got some exciting new opportunities for the team to discuss." I cut him off before he could get too far into his spiel. "Actually, Greg, we have something we need to talk about first." His smirk faltered slightly, but he leaned back in his chair, waiting for me to continue. "We've all been putting in a lot of hours without compensation," I began, "and we've made it clear that this isn't sustainable. We're burnt out and we feel undervalued. You've ignored our requests for better work-life balance, and it's become clear that you expect us to continue working overtime without any extra pay." Greg's eyes narrowed. "If you're not committed to the company, maybe this isn't the right place for you." "I agree," I said, meeting his gaze, "which is why we've all decided to resign." For a moment, there was complete silence. Greg's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then quickly to anger. "What do you mean, all of you?" he demanded. I glanced around the room. Every member of the team was there, nodding in agreement. "We've all decided that if you can't respect our time and pay us fairly for the work we do, then we can't continue working here." Greg stood up, his face turning red. "You're seriously all walking out? Do you have any idea what this will do to the company?" "We know exactly what it will do," I said calmly, "and that's why we're doing it." There was nothing more to say. One by one, we handed in our resignation letters and walked out of that conference room. Greg was left standing there, speechless. The fallout was immediate. Without the entire department, the company was left scrambling. Projects stalled, clients were furious, and the workload Greg had piled onto us was now his to deal with. Within days, I started hearing rumors that upper management had gotten involved, and Greg was facing serious backlash for how he had handled the situation. As for the rest of us, we landed on our feet. It wasn't easy at first. Quitting a job without another one lined up is always a risk. But we had each other's backs. Most of us found new positions within weeks, at companies that actually valued our time and compensated us fairly for the work we did. Looking back, quitting was one of the best decisions I ever made. It wasn't just about leaving a toxic environment, it was about standing up for myself and my team. We refused to be taken advantage of, and in the end, we proved that no job is worth sacrificing your well-being. Greg learned the hard way that you can't treat people like they're disposable and expect them to stick around. And as for me, I've never been happier. I found a new job that respects my boundaries, values my contributions, and, most importantly, pays me for the hours I work. Walking out that day was scary, but it was the right thing to do. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even if it means taking the whole department with you.